Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 26th of September, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me by video link today are Mark Anderson and Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, both. Later in the programme, we'll be looking at the potential for Arab-Israeli war. We'll also be looking at the Gaza Flotilla, the United Nations at 80, and the pandemic treaty, a bit more on that. But we're going to begin, of course, with the big news from the UK today, which is digital ID. Because the Starmer regime has announced a new policy, which they've been warning about for years. Actually, let's put this on screen. Digital ID. What can we say about it? Well, here's what Starmer said about it. He said, "I know working people are worried about the level of illegal migration into the country. A secure border and controlled migration are reasonable demands. And this government is listening and delivering." He said, "Digital ID is an enormous opportunity for the UK. It will make it tougher to work illegally in this country, making our borders secure." And he said it will also offer ordinary citizens, countless benefits, like being able to prove your identity to access key services swiftly, rather than hunting around for an old utility bill. So there you go. It's all about convenience. Well, he pushed out Lisa Nandy this morning to do the rounds on the various news programs. She's the culture secretary. Well, this is what she had to say to Sky News this morning.
Well, first of all, it's not a brick card. That would obviously raise all sorts of issues across the whole of the UK. And so we're calling it what it is, which is digital ID. And the idea is that we've got a country that has for a long time been living in a digital era but operating in an analog way. We've been looking over the last year at lots of different options and different countries and the ways that they have rolled out digital ID, including Estonia. And the major benefit of digital ID, of course, is that it makes it far easier for employers to check whether somebody has the right to work here. So for people who come here and want to work, it will be compulsory to show it. For all other UK citizens, it will be compulsory to have it, but not to show it. People will be able to choose whether they use it or not. But we think for a lot of people, me included, who spend a lot of time digging out utility bills and national insurance numbers and copies of passports to prove verification in lots of different ways, that this will have a big benefit as well.
So you lose your liberty in exchange for convenience. It's great stuff. And it is going to be mandatory. Some of the comments that she made this morning suggested that she was trying to deny that, but of course, she's splitting hairs there by saying that it's not going to be mandatory for UK citizens to show it, but it's certainly going to be mandatory for UK citizens to have it. Now, the response to the news has been pretty impressive, well, this petition has been running since the 4th of September, but it's really kicked off in the last 24 hours since this news broke yesterday. Well, when I looked at this at about 9 o'clock this morning, there were 650,000 signatures on it. And this screenshot I took just before we came, I guess actually probably about midday or so, or 12:15. And it was 856,000. It was about 875,000 just before I came down onto for the news program, and it's probably well over 900,000 by now. So this is going off the scales as far as a typical Parliament petition is concerned. But let's have a look then at what some of the opposition voices have been saying. So this is Nigel Farage.
I saw enough during the pandemic with vaccine passports. It created a two-tier society of those who could go to places, those who could travel, all based on the fact that unless you were vaxxed, you were a danger because you might pass the virus on to somebody else. Then we learned that simply wasn't true, and yet our freedoms have been taken away for that period of time in a way that had never happened before. I am personally vehemently opposed to this in every single way, let alone the abuse that could happen if any of these sites are hacked and your data is taken. So I am deadly against.
So before we move on, then, Patrick, let me welcome you to the programme and just get a couple of thoughts on this.
Well, straight off the bat, Mike, then thank you for having me today. It's a bit rich for Nigel Farage to be sort of throwing up opposition now after the ball has already moved down the field. He could have opposed this a while back, and he didn't say much about this as it was linked to the immigration issue. And we were warning before everybody else, okay, that we used the immigration crisis to fast track a digital ID. So in this way, and you wonder why Elon Musk is funding Tommy Robinson and Peter Thiel and all these other so-called conservatives, all these big tech oligarchs are pushing the immigration issue, the anti-Muslim issue, to get people riled up. And there is on the so-called right, and there's Keir Starmer on the so-called left saying, we are listening to the people and we want to solve the problem and deal with the immigrants, and the digital ID is a solution. I mean, this is such a Punch and Judy show, Mike. The whole left-right thing should be exposed as a total pantomime at this point. I don't know what to say.
Well, I think you've said quite a bit there, and I absolutely agree with everything that you've said. So let's have a look then at the situation in other countries, because Lisa Nandy mentioned Estonia there, but in fact there are 3 other countries that are being used as sort of sources of authority, shall we say, for the best practice for this rollout. One is Australia, another is Denmark, and another is India. So let's have a look at each of these in turn, and we'll have a look at, since she mentioned it, we'll have a look at Estonia first. So Estonia is enhancing the security of its digital identities. This is a story from 2017 because they discovered a major vulnerability in their digital ID then. In July 2021, an attacker managed to get hold of somewhere between 280 and 300,000 identity document photographs from the state ID document database. This incident was discovered. The suspect was arrested. The system was patched, but the data was lost to the internet. And well, of course, these kinds of things happen reasonably regularly. Then if we look at Australia, beginning in 2019, there's been a large and growing number of MyGov, it's called MyGov in Australia, account takeovers and scams, so phishing scams, SIM swaps, credential stuffing, all the usual stuff, with thousands of accounts suspended and more than 10,000 reports of misuse into ID care. Services Australia reported sharp rises in social engineering breaches in 2024, and certainly thousands, if not tens of thousands of accounts were affected. And there have been repeated waves of this between 2022 and 2025. Then we have MediSecure. This is the electronic prescription provider with government links and contracts, and they suffered a ransomware data theft incident, which affected 12.9 million Australians' prescriptions, including contact details and Medicare details. And then Services Australia and Centrelink breaches, which were highlighted in the Commonwealth Ombudsman report here on screen, keeping MyGov secure, and saying that failures to take protective action after breaches were causing growing misuse of Centrelink and Medicare-linked accounts. In Denmark, then, between 2015 and 2020, a software or a configuration error, whichever, in the government tax portal led to 1.26 million personal ID numbers being exposed to third-party services and otherwise leaked. And then the local here, they ran an investigation which reported vulnerabilities that allowed attackers to guess MIT ID usernames and to lock accounts, and that required changes to the MIT ID system. And then the NEM ID system, which is the successor digital ID in Denmark, experienced major outages and crashes that caused government services to fail. And as I say, MIT ID is gradually replacing NEM ID. So not so great in Denmark either. And then finally in India, in 2018, the Unique Identification Authority of India, which runs the biometric identity card scheme there, they looked into, they launched a police probe into major security breach. In 2023, then data from the Indian Council of Medical Research database appeared online with a hacker apparently saying that India's biggest data breach has leaked the personal data of over 800 million Indians, and so on. So that included name, father's name, phone number, other number, passport number, the digital ID number, and age. And in fact, there have been dozens of data breaches related to the Unique Identification Authority of India over the past decade or so. And these 4 countries are the countries that are being used or being looked to by Britain for best practice. But it should be no surprise to anyone that Starmer is pursuing this. Remember, he stood on a platform of change at the last general election, so it was obvious that he would continue doing exactly what the Tories were doing before him. But we should also remember that it's Tony Blair that's been driving this policy the hardest. And since Starmer is Blair's poodle, there should be no surprise here either. Now, here's a brand new article on screen at the moment from the Tony Blair Institute. It's time for digital ID. It says the British public are running out of patience with a state that does not work, where interactions with public services are beset by inconveniences and delays, even as outcomes slip and costs rise. Now, this is a good point, convenience, because that is the mantra. And we should all keep in mind that if we're going to resist policies such as this, signing petitions probably isn't enough. Something we should do, but it's not enough. We must, it seems to me, we need to accept inconvenience in our lives. Anyway, they go on in this article. A modern digital ID does 3 things. It allows people to prove who they are, who they say they are, prove that certain things about them are true, and seamlessly and securely access services on that basis. So that's what they had to say. Now, they went on to post a load of stats and so on. They're claiming that something around 62% of Britons are in support of this initiative, and that only 19% of people are actually against it. Well, that's their claim. And of course, we could probably suggest that the reason that Keir Starmer thinks that it's a sensible thing to proceed with this particular policy is because of the statistics provided to him by the Tony Blair Institute. Now, as Patrick said there a couple of minutes ago, of course, we've been warning about this for quite a number of years. It was all about, if you remember back, it was all about a safer internet. It was all about the Online Safety Act when it was still a bill and not yet passed. We were told how great it was going to be, especially for children. And children, of course, are going to be protected from online pornography. In those days, it was Nadine Dorries who was leading the charge. Age verification was the clarion cry, and age verification is what we got. Of course, that's what we got under Starmer. So that's change, you see. And so that was digital ID. I believe this was 2018 when we were reporting this. This is already, of course, as well as age verification, rolled out as digital ID for company directors, with the recent promise that non-compliance will result in your company being shut down. So if you don't get your digital ID registered with Companies House, they will go to court and have your company shut down if necessary. And let's not forget the Data Use and the Data Use and Access Act, which we were talking about all the way through its passage. That recently passed. And it's something which we once again warned about. It included making provision for the regulation of the processing of information related to identified or identifiable living individuals. So, and if we remember what Peter Kyle said at the time, we have an outdated approach to data, which is holding back Britain's economy. This bill will take the brakes off, unleashing a new era of wealth creation for all. Well, it won't be an era of wealth creation for all, but maybe for a few. And if we remember, this is what the digital identity architecture was going to look like: a wallet that sits on your phone with attributes such as your legal name, date of birth, right to reside, right to work, or right to study. And this was published by the Tory government several years ago, and nothing is going to change here either. So, if we're talking about who's going to be making lots of money, then we got to remember it's going to be people like this lot, Yoti, and all the other digital ID providers that because the digital ID industry has expanded exponentially over the last few years as it became clear that this policy was going to become law. So just a quick reminder of the petition. And let's just remember that there are people out there that are opposing this. Maybe people would want to get involved with that. Sign the petition. Big Brother Watch is one running a No to Digital ID campaign. Together is another one that's running No to Digital ID cards. And if you're in Glasgow tomorrow, you might want to attend this event, which is taking place tomorrow between 12 and 3:30. Digital slavery information communication operation. Details on screen, and they'll be in the show notes as well. Okay. That's that. Clearly, everybody, or not everybody, but lots of people becoming very motivated by this topic. I think the Starmer regime is going to get a lot more pushback to it than they perhaps expected, and that's to be welcomed. Now, let's move on then to the Middle East. And Patrick, the possibility of conflict between the Arab nations and Israel, which perhaps spells the end of the Abraham Accords.
Very well put, Mike, and we'll explain how that is coming about. This is the big fear right now. I do scan and I do study the mainstream media very closely, especially papers of record, daily headlines, because when they start to get into certain topics, you know that things are moving, and on this issue, things are moving in a probably not a great way for Israel or the United States, but there could be a prelude to an actual war here. In other words, we could be returning to the 1960s and 70s. So let's take a look at how. First clue, the New York Times runs this as a front page story on their print edition, as well as on their website. For Arab nations with ties to Israel, talking about the Abraham Accord, Mike, there, attacks on Qatar and Gaza City raise anxiety. Now, it's a pretty tame headline, but what are we looking at here? This is Qatar is the main focus. They just got hit, and the United States and Israel on the other side. And so this is the Arab world is now looking at Israel and the United States as kind of one unit now, and the U.S. is not able to play that sort of game of deniability or the fact that Israel's an independent actor and has its own agenda. Now, what precipitated this? Let's look at this. This was just recently the Israeli attack on the Qatari capital of Doha, attempting to assassinate the Palestinian Hamas negotiation team. That's one of the big things here that's precipitating this anxiety in the Arab world. And the other is this, which is Israel's invasion of Gaza. And you can see Benjamin Netanyahu there is all smiles right now as he sees residential buildings being downed on a daily basis in Gaza City. He says that's to prevent them from being used by Hamas. I mean, what a flimsy excuse after 2 years of this, but yet it's a lot of people are swallowing it. That was an Axios headline there. They're just kind of reporting on this, but I think the world is seeing this very differently. Now, let's look at how this is shaping up and how this is history repeating itself. Now, in terms of the Arab countries, what we're talking about here are the ones that no longer feel secure. First up is Egypt. This is probably the most important Arab country. Egypt has a peace treaty with Israel. Is that going to hold? There's al-Sisi there, President Sisi. Next up is Jordan. They also share a border with occupied Palestine and Israel. There's King Abdullah there, normally regarded as a client state of the U.S. and Britain, but now things are changing. And then next, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. You can see Mohammed bin Salman there. A lot of changes going on this week with Saudi Arabia and their stance and their position as well. And then last but not least, not an Arab country, but Turkey. And that's why we put an asterisk there. It's not an Arab country, but Turkey may find itself now in the crosshairs somewhat of Israel, and we'll explain how. Now, the most important piece, as I said, is Egypt. Let's go over and look at what the issues are for Egypt. And this is a very serious situation indeed. And so we look at this first and foremost is the issue of the Palestinians. Egypt's issue is they don't want to see the displacement of Palestinians into Egypt. regarding this as a red line. Now, mind you, many have already been displaced into Egypt, medical evacuees and so forth. But the next one is important. They're looking for a place to host the Hamas delegation. There are people in Egypt to do it out of solidarity with the Palestinians in Egypt. So hosting Hamas negotiations could invite attacks by Israel. That could break their long-held peace agreement here. Next, Israel informed Washington they are concerned about Egyptian military buildup in the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, now Egypt has every right to move troops inside of its own borders. This kind of reminds you, doesn't it, Mike, about Western concerns of Russian troop buildups within Russian borders prior to February 2022. And we all know what happened after that. And of course, Russia was demonized and sanctioned and so forth and blamed for everything, including an 8-year civil war that was precipitated by the U.S. coup in Maidan. Let's not digress. Next, now things, you can see where this is heading. Next, Israeli concerns about Hamas militants who've managed to cross the border with refugees, or so Israel claims. This could provoke an Israeli attack on Egyptian soil. Egypt has already accepted 100,000 medical evacuees and others who have fled during the genocide. And last but not least, this is risking a repeat of the 1978 PLO Lebanon trap. It's important to understand history. This is what kicked off, mainly what kicked off the so-called Lebanese civil war, was the PLO being pushed into South Lebanon, and then Israel using that as an excuse to attack, invade, and occupy South Lebanon for many, in fact, a few decades. Okay, so you could see the exact same scenario playing out here with Egypt. Now, is this something Israel would like? Possibly. And so it seems like they're doing everything possible to make this happen. So keep an eye on this Egyptian situation. All of the signs in this New York Times article point to a narrative that is being constructed here. Next up, let's go to the Kingdom of Jordan. There's King Abdullah there. Now, mainly, there's fears that are palpable. Israel will force millions of Palestinians over Jordan's border with the West Bank. That's the number one concern now for Jordan. Next, Israeli officials becoming more vocal about annexing the West Bank and the Jordan Valley, again, bordering the Kingdom of Jordan. And after the Abraham Accords, Netanyahu had declared in 2020 the Jordan Valley belongs to Israel, but temporarily held off in exchange for Arab normalization. That was a call by the UAE at the time. So you can see Israel's been using the Abraham Accords in conjunction with its own sort of expansionist military operations to basically play the West and play the other Arab countries, and in the meantime, change facts on the ground. This has been Israel's game. The problem is King Abdullah has been put in a corner by his American and British and Israeli handlers, and they made him detain and arrest over 1,000 people right after October 7th. And did so really on behalf of Israel and the United States. So his legitimacy as a ruler is really coming into question, according to the opposition there. Now, put this in context here. Marco Rubio, what was he doing in Israel recently? There he is at the Wailing Wall, putting the note in to the wall. That's the old Roman garrison wall. It's not the old temple, by the way, the old Roman garrison wall. And during his recent visit, Rubio said that the United States is warning about the recognition of the Palestinian state by other UN member states outside of negotiation. So he's saying countries don't have a right to recognize a Palestinian state unless they go into U.S.-led negotiations. So it's really an anti-sovereign or anti-sovereignty signal by Rubio in the U.S. saying they won't accept anybody having their own foreign policy on this issue. And he's basically saying that Israeli politicians' talk of annexations was a reciprocal action to unilateral moves for recognizing a Palestinian state. So what Rubio is saying is trying to twist what's actually happened and say Israel's only being aggressive because of this threat of a Palestinian state being recognized, when in fact, according to the Europeans, it's the opposite. So you can see how the Punch and Judy game is playing. So here's Donald Trump yesterday, and he's been confronted about Israel openly calling for the annexation of the West Bank Here's Donald Trump.
But did you promise leaders this week that you would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank? And is that something that you?
I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. No, I will not allow it. It's not going to happen.
Did you speak with Netanyahu about this directly?
Yeah, but I'm not going to allow it. Whether I spoke to him or not, I did. But I'm not allowing Israel to annex the West Bank. There's been enough. It's time to stop now, okay? Yes,
Question here is, do you actually trust Donald Trump? Do you trust that Donald Trump is what he said, does that carry any weight at all? That's what he's saying. I won't allow it, but that's not what Israel's saying. So we'll see how that one plays out. So back to the other actors here. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There's Mohammed bin Salman. Okay. What is the difference here? An Arab NATO or a new Middle East NATO? Saudi just announced a new strategic defense pact with Pakistan. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. This is big news. Okay. Just happened this week. Okay. In conjunction with everything that we've just said this week. Next, Saudi's realizing the Abraham Accords aren't worth the paper they're written on. So I think we can say at this point, really after the Qatar attack by Israel and the latest Gaza, Abraham Accords are dead in the water. It's only the UAE hanging on by a thread, probably. And so next, now Saudi Arabia no longer regards Iran as the primary threat in the region. Very important. So the gambit by the U.S. and Israel is basically out the window. The gambit they've been playing for a very long time is now out the window because of the actions of Israel and the U.S. And GCC ally Bahrain also now has made signals they feel insecure about this as well. So think about it. Israel's basically attacking the Arab countries. He is assassinating heads of state. They tried to kill, and somewhat successfully, most of the Yemeni parliament while they were in session. Okay, so this is what targeted assassinations, unprovoked attacks, this is what Israel's now engaged with around the Arab world. So now for Turkey, some of their military facilities were hit recently inside Syria by Israel. Okay, that includes missile stocks and other things that were dotted around in key positions in Syria. This is a change right now. And next, Erdogan's HTS Jolani project may no longer be useful for Israel and the United States. So it's past its sell-by date. They've achieved what they wanted in terms of annexing the Golan Heights. But Turkey's safe for now, so long as they're a NATO member. So long as they're a NATO member. If you start seeing talk about Turkey being kicked out of NATO by the Trump administration, then you know the game is on. So we'll go here to responsible statecraft, and they're even saying this is this week. So what I'm telling you is that a narrative is building. After Israel striking Qatar, is Turkey next? So this is a major foreign policy microphone in the United States. So some clues there. So now we're back to the end of this sort of analysis of the axis of chaos. The United States and Israel can only be described objectively as state terrorists. And they are using and are allied with very closely now Syria, that has a self-appointed president, al-Jilani, al-Sharar, whatever his name is this week, former terrorist leader, former ISIS head, deputy head, former founder of al-Qaeda in Syria. This is now one of the main tools of the United States, and that is to sow chaos in neighboring Lebanon, as well as other parts of the region. So this is where things are at right now. All of the ingredients, Mike, point to an escalation, a broader regional escalation here, if things continue on the trajectory they're currently at.
Patrick, thank you very much for that. Sorry about that. That's quite concerning. We'll talk about that in extra, I have no doubt. Now, if you like what the UK column does, you'd like to support us, then the details of how you can do that, sorry, let's take that off screen, are on the front page of the UK Column website. There is a big blue button there that you can click. I want to say thank you once again to everybody that is a member or is making donations and so on. Your support is much appreciated. If you can't support us financially, please do support us by sharing our reports and our material, because that helps us beat the censorship regime in this country. Another reminder of the York event taking place on the 18th of October. Live tickets are all sold, but there's still the opportunity to watch on live stream. Please do if you possibly can. It's going to be a fantastic day, and speakers on screen at the moment, you know who they are anyway. It's going to be a fantastic day. Don't miss it. Now, Jerm is still in China, so we're showing again his discussion with Mike Eden, asking is science dead, at 7 p.m. tonight. So join us live on the live stream for that. And then on Sunday at 7 o'clock, the first of the new series of the 1,000 Words podcast will be out. Let's just have a look at the trailer for that.
1,000 Words is coming to UK Column. Watch Katie Jo Murphy, co-founder of Hope Sussex, sit for her portrait whilst deep diving into life, the universe and everything. First episode airs this weekend on UK Column.
£7 p.m. Sunday for that. If you didn't see the discussion I had with Vanessa on the sectarianism building in the UK and Europe, that went out at 1 o'clock yesterday. It's on the UK Column website now as an on-demand version. I want to point out two articles. One published actually at the end of August from David Miller, entitled How the British Intelligence Network of AstroTurfed Muslim Civil Society Groups is Kept Secret and Deniable. If you haven't read this yet, please do read it and share it. But there's an update to that now, and the latest article is entitled How Muslim Civil Society Groups Are Astroturfed into Products by British Intelligence. This is part 2 of this series of articles. It's extremely important to understand. Please read it and share it as you see fit. And then a final reminder that on Sunday, the 20th in Edinburgh, is the Food and Health Festival. Details on screen and in the show notes. Okay, let's come back then. And Mark, let me welcome you to the program. It's the 80th anniversary of the United Nations this year. What have the think tanks been saying about it?
Well, that's an interesting juxtaposition versus what Donald Trump recently told the General Assembly upon the 80th meeting of that body. Of course, American conservatives, many MAGA supporters, will give Trump a little bit of kudos for speaking out against the green agenda, which is part of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and speaking out against the insecurity of borders and way too much migration, things like that. However, it was a very mixed bag, as you reported Wednesday, to say the least, Mike, in terms of what Donald Trump had to say. But the ever-busy Chicago Council on Global Affairs, arguably one of the busiest think tanks in the world, a close cousin of the Council on Foreign Relations, and, of course, the former leader of Chatham House is now leading the Chicago Council. Well, they brought out another one of their surveys amid the appearance by Trump at the UN. This is the Lester Crown Center on U.S. Foreign Policy being involved. It's also the 50th anniversary of these ongoing Chicago Council surveys about various issues. And Lester Crown, the Crown family, keep in mind, is a defense industry-related family, General Dynamics. So there could be some biases there, some things to think about. Anyway, there's some well enlarged bullet points here I'll share on screen just to very quickly summarize what's going on. We have the CCGA survey, key findings. 2/3 of Americans say the U.S. should be more willing to make decisions within the United Nations, even if it means the U.S. will sometimes have to go along with policies that aren't its first choice. There tends to be a much more Democrat than Republican support of the UN and its policies. Majorities of Democrats and independents support this compromise approach compared to just 4 in 10 Republicans. And there's a couple more brief bullet points that round out this survey. and this is especially interesting. Let's show this one. Largest ever partisan gap. 4 in 10 Americans view strengthening the UN, and this keeps coming up in this survey, the idea of strengthening the UN as a very important goal for the U.S., similar to attitudes over the past 50 years of the Chicago Council survey. And here it gets a little more interesting. Democrats are far more likely than independents or Republicans to say strengthening the UN is a very important U.S. goal for foreign policy. And this is the largest partisan divide on this UN question in the entire 50 years of the Chicago Council's polling. The Chicago Council used to be called the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations. Of course, the original CFR in New York had a lot to do with bringing the UN into existence when the League of Nations failed. Lots of propaganda at that time for world governance. Anyway, this is the only chart I'll show as part of this Chicago Council on Global Affairs survey. Let's put this up there. It's interesting in its own way. And the question is, should U.S. leaders consider UN resolutions in policymaking? When you look at a great deal to the answer to that question, you see Republicans fairly low and Democrats much higher and independents in between. But when you say that U.S. leaders should consider UN resolutions to a fair degree, you actually see Republicans and Democrats almost on the same level, the orange and the blue there at the second line down. And that is mainly the MAGA movement that creates that schism there. And when you read through the survey, you kind of get the impression that the MAGA movement is almost another political party unto itself that rode the Republican banner to get into office. That's a theory of mine at this point. It seems to be panning out more and more. Now, in association, Mike, with that survey, there was a discussion at the Chicago Council headquarters in Chicago. And here is the title page to that, The Future of Multilateralism, the UN at 80 and Beyond. And I have a slide that shows the speakers and a very quick summation of what they had to say. This forum was on the 22nd of September to go along with that survey. The moderator, Paul Post, University of Chicago political science professor, he said a key item is the future of multilateralism as embodied in the UN system. Important words there. The UN is a system, not just a forum. And Professor Ian Hurd of Northwestern University, he had this to say: the International Criminal Court is a UN reform, a freestanding institution, when the idea of UN reforms was brought up during the discussion. And lastly, Juliet Sorensen, a Loyola law professor, she suggested eliminating the permanent 5 veto. And that, of course, would have a lot of ramifications. And she said the UN Charter is amendable in regards to critics of the UN and some of the things they have to say. And Leslie Vinjamuri, as I mentioned, the former head of Chatham House, is now leading the Chicago Council. Chatham House, the New York CFR, the Chicago Council are birds of a feather here. They're ideological cousins. She had this to say: if turning up is what matters, like showing up somewhere, then the sheer popularity of the forum with world leaders is a clear indicator that the UN is widely viewed to be politically relevant and an important platform for shaping international discourse and influencing public opinion. She also had this to say, there's one more quote from her: when measured by its ability to deliver impactful material solutions to the most critical global problems, however, the UN's relevance looks far worse, Leslie Vinjamuri said. It's been radically diminished, she went on to say, by the U.S. decision to delay critical budgetary support. Now, much of the discussion by that panel portrayed the UN as little more than a forum and a platform. But actually, the UN is a lot more than that. And there's some historical things to talk about with regards to that briefly. Of course, the UN Charter was only 5 years old when a war under UN auspices, the Korean War, was fought starting in 1950 to 1953. And my first newspaper boss who served in Korea said that everybody called it a UN war or UN-led military operation. That's what he and other soldiers were calling it. Anyway, this article from 1996 revisits an important facet of the UN, and this is having to do with Michael New from the Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington, mid-1990s. The court-martial goes easy on the Army medic Michael New, convicted of disobedience and discharged for refusing UN insignia and refusing UN command. And Michael New at the time was the 22-year-old American soldier and medic who was court-martialed for refusing to accept foreign command on a United Nations operation. And lastly, this is just a reminder, this next slide, Mike, that on the UK Column website is an interview I did almost exactly 1 year ago with Daniel New, the father of Michael New. At the time, Michael New chose not to be on the interview with us, but it talks about Michael New's experiences in the mid-90s as an Army soldier in Germany when he showed up for revelry one day and they just said, you're going to put on the UN insignia, you're going to put on the UN berets and the armbands, and you're going to serve under UN command in Macedonia. And he refused because on constitutional grounds, he had only signed up to defend the U.S. Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. So that shows some of the conflicts that sovereign nations can have with the UN system that the Chicago professor moderating that discussion talked about. Some interesting perspective there. And of course, that shows there's much more that Donald Trump could have talked about that would have made maybe a better case for him. But I think he went down a very perilous road and a very controversial one, criticizing the UN for supporting Palestine, which is one of the UN's brighter spots, of course. But maybe we can go more in extra, Mike, but that provides a pretty broad perspective for the time being.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that. Patrick, let's go back to the Middle East then. And what has been going on with the flotilla?
Well, let's just give an update on this situation. There's over 50 boats heading for Gaza that departed from Barcelona, from Sicily, and also from Tunisia and a few other ports. And what's incredible is this is now getting global mainstream, finally, global mainstream attention here. And what the reporting is very interesting. I just put the CNN article as an example. Italy and Spain to deploy naval ships to help Gaza aid flotilla targeted in drone attacks. So there's been multiple drone attacks. We've spoken to some of the members on boats that have been attacked in the last 24 hours. And we do have a video clip we'll share in a little bit of one of those people, Frank Romano, who is on, I believe, the Spectre, a boat called the Spectre. But so they are getting attention now. So it looks like, along with this announcement of the recognition of the Palestinian state, they are getting some attention here. And this is Israel's response. It's just somewhat comical from the Israelis, basically saying that we're starting to what they're calling a terrorist flotilla, basically. The response from the Hamas flotilla representatives that the flotilla insists on is pursuing a violent course of action, etc. And you could look above and there's one of the flotilla boats and they're singing peace songs led by a guitar player and so forth. So, I mean, to characterize this as a Hamas flotilla, it's just par for the course for Israel. More lies, unfortunately. So here is Frank Romano on board the Spectre, just off the coast of Crete, where there's a rallying point happening now. And we're not giving away anything because this is all public. And of course, those attacking them with drones from Israel know exactly what it is anyway. But here's Frank Romano with, I think, a very positive message after being attacked in the last 48 hours.
Hello, here we are, getting ready. We're putting all the boats together to start the last leg of our journey to Gaza. Here we are outside of Crete Islands. You see all the boats. We are towing a boat. looks like an old fishing vessel that perhaps the motor's not working. Anyway, we are waiting for the final decision to group together the boats from Barcelona, Tunisia, Italy, and Greece, and finally head on our last leg to Gaza. It should take about 5 to 6 days, God willing. You see all the boats there in the cove over there. And we are very, very upbeat. We want to send a message to the Gazan people, to the Gazan Palestinians. We're on our way. You have not been forgotten. We're going to open up the People's Corridor. Then we're going to break the siege, inspiring other activists to follow us. So in other words, we're not giving up on this. We'll have massive number of boats by sea, and then hopefully a massive number of people continuing the March to Gaza movement in coordination eventually until Israel has to withdraw from Gaza with its aider and abettor United States, war criminals, and from the West Bank, and we can help Palestine to free itself. And as I've said a million times before, Palestine has led the way to the world to show we can resist this military-industrial complex. We can resist this money powers that control the entire world today, to either directly or with respect, or indirectly with respect to Russia and China. They, anytime any country that doesn't agree with the United States or Israel does something different, they're subject to sanctions. But we are saying we're going to free ourselves from the claws of this military-industrial complex, money interests that control us, this oligarchy, this stifling, vicious, evil oligarchy that controls us, including that's really pushing to exterminate the Gazan Palestinians. We will free ourselves from that, God willing.
Real passionate message there from Dr. Frank Romano. And again, he also informed us that Israel had contacted these boats, sent a message saying that they're welcome to sail to Ashkelon, which is an Israeli port, and drop off of their aid there. And who knows what would happen, whether their boats would be seized like last time with the Madeleine, the Conscience, and the other boat that was seized as well. And then what would happen to the aid? He said they don't trust the Israelis, so they're making their way to Gaza nonetheless. So you can see the Israelis are trying different tactics here, even trying to coax them to basically stand down, as it were, and not go to Gaza. They're calling ships going to Gaza as illegal, when in fact it's completely legal under international law, maritime law, and so forth. So Israel has their own sort of version of international law. Now, and this is also, I think, an important development here. Spain is one of the European countries here that has deployed a military vessel to support the flotilla. They're staying at a safe distance. They're to provide perhaps some kind of support should these boats fall under a serious attack or something like that. But they're obviously not going to engage the Israelis. I would think not. And Italy as well. Italy has done the same. We actually of one of the flotilla members and has cited the Italian ship, one of multiple Italian ships, naval assets that have been deployed. Here's the video clip.
But then we saw last night already. No, yeah. I did see that one in the sunset.
Is the support idea about the Navy ships are joining us.
So we have quite a bit more material on this and updates. I would encourage people to go to their Instagram page, Global Sumud Flotilla, and also on X. We have a lot more video messages that were sent to us from the boats. We will play more in extra, Mike, but in the interest of time, we've shown you this. But just suffice to say that now leaving Greek territorial waters and really due to arrive on the shores of Gaza if they are successful in sort of 4 days' time. But again, we don't know how this is going to end. We hope it doesn't end with anybody being hurt or worse. That would be horrible. But with the Israelis I don't think they care about the welfare of the people in the boats at all, judging by how they treat the Palestinian population. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for that. We wish them all the best. Now, sticking with this topic to some degree, if you remember in August, we talked about Unit 8200 and the fact that they were using Microsoft Azure's, the Microsoft Cloud Platform Azure for processing various forms of surveillance that they had collected from the telecoms networks and so on. And there were allegations that this was being used for targeting in Gaza. This was blown by The Guardian, Plus 972 magazine, and a couple of others. So this article here, Microsoft storing Israeli intelligence trove used to attack Palestinians, was the headline on this. And if you remember, we were talking about another example here, Intel News, saying Israeli intelligence using Microsoft servers to store intercepted phone call data. Now, Microsoft said that they responded to this. They said that they had opened the second investigation into it, but that was on August the 15th. And by the time we reported this at the beginning of this month, it was about a month had gone past, or certainly since the beginning of the inquiry, and Microsoft still had taken no action. In the meantime, though, some of their staff were beginning to protest, and this organization, No Azure for Apartheid, was set up, and Microsoft staff saying we refuse to be complicit. Well, The Guardian here is reporting now. Sorry, that's actually the Guardian today. I don't have the graphic for it. Was reporting then that Microsoft has now decided to kick Unit 8200 off its Azure platform, and this has happened quite quickly, is how it's being described. I would say that it's actually happened extremely slowly. It's taken them months to reach this decision. I think that Unit 8200, for PR purposes, has decided to move off that platform. Undoubtedly, they've found an alternative solution. It remains to be seen exactly what that is. Microsoft then gets to claim a success purely for PR, and perhaps the protests end. But in the meantime, the targeting will not stop, and Unit 8200 will be continuing to gather its bulk data for processing, undoubtedly using a different platform. So I'm not entirely as positive about Microsoft's announcement as perhaps they are. But Patrick, back to you then. And people got a quick preview there because it looks like Tony Blair is going to have a role to play in the new Gaza.
Yeah, the convergence of digital IDs and real estate deals in Gaza, and ethnically cleansing the native Palestinian population. Of course, a TB outbreak in Gaza is the last thing that people in the region need. But there he is. So Washington is Donald Trump is backing Tony Blair's role as the head of the transitional authority in Gaza. So a war criminal is being put in charge of a disaster fomented by other war criminals. I mean, you can't make it up. President Trump is backing the plan would see Tony Blair head a, quote, temporary administration. It's like he'll be the Paul Bremer of Gaza, lording over the ashes of this genocide, initially without direct involvement of the Palestinian Authority, according to Israel. So there's Israel's guy, Tony Blair, agent of chaos here. Arab states have said they would only contribute to a UN-mandated international peacekeeping force if there's a clear political timeline for the formation of the Palestinian state, not just the intent of the Palestinian state or the recognition by these leading G7 countries and so forth, and the 156 UN members have recognized the Palestinian state. It's not enough. It's not enough for the Arab states. They say they want to see some concrete action. Otherwise, they're not going to get involved in any UN-mandated peacekeeping forces. So they're reserving that right. Fair enough. And then finally, but but instead represents a different, more benign occupation than that provided by Israel. So Tony Blair will be presiding over a more benign occupation, let's just say. I think that's something that should make you feel good about this whole scenario. I'm just joking, but this is incredible, Mike, that Blair, of all people, would be shoehorned into this role. It's unreal.
Incredible and unreal, I have to say, Patrick, are not words that I would be using. Maybe we can, during extra, discuss which words might be I might be happier to use. But anyway, let's quickly move on to the Arctic, actually, because if you have a look at UK Column website and use the search function and type in the word Arctic, you'll see a host of different reports on the Arctic and why the Arctic is becoming important. The BBC back in July had this article: "The struggle for control of the Arctic is accelerating and riskier than ever." And if you remember back a few weeks, Patrick and I attended an event at Plymouth University, which was showing a new documentary entitled "Arming the Arctic," which was really a bit of a NATO propaganda piece. The Arctic is something which is absolutely featured in many reports from Parliament, the House of Lords, and so on. Why are we talking about it today? Because and why, in fact, is it strategically important in this way? Well, this gives us a clue. This is the China Academy, and they've just published this article: "China-Europe Arctic route cuts transit to 18 days, down from 30 via Suez." So this is the inauguration, effectively, of the Arctic Silk Road. And in this case, they were taking goods, a cargo ship with, I think, 1,000 containers on it, from a port in China to Felixstowe in the United Kingdom. And they were doing that in 18 days without the risk of the Suez Canal and the passing, not that a Chinese ship would be at risk necessarily from passing Yemen, but nonetheless, this becomes a game changer as far as getting goods to UK and Europe, Western Europe. And China's been working on it for a very long time. It is therefore becoming a massive place for competition of the so-called great powers. So we'll talk about that later as well. And just very briefly, Mark, then related to that is the Ditchley Foundation and their desire to consider the Indo-Pacific as a region to look at.
Yes, viewers might recall, Mike, that I covered Ditchley right around the time of Bilderberg in mid-June or so. They met exactly at the time that Bilderberg met in Sweden. And Ditchley is kind of a ideological cousin of Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission, nominally more open than Bilderberg. But this slide shows that they're meeting starting today through the 28th of September. And the conference is at Green Tree, I believe that's in the UK, in partnership with the American Ditchley branch. There's also a Canadian Ditchley branch. Of course, it's another elitist think tank where big money is married to big politics. That's kind of the leverage that they make sure stays in place. But yes, the Indo-Pacific, including China, of course, is high on their agenda. And the way they operate, they won't release details on this probably for at least 3 to 4 weeks. And when they do, of course, we'll report that.
Thank you, Mark. And then let's just end today with a brief update on the pandemic treaty.
Yeah, important stuff. I did a headline for American Free Press, a brief article recently, and it shows in this next slide, it shows that headline: "One Worlder's Global Pandemic Treaty Hits a Few Snags." And the U.S. and Argentina withheld their participation in the still ongoing treaty talks. And Slovakia, during recent talks, had the gall to request a vote. And when Slovakia took that action, some 46 delegates of participating nations simply left the room and did not return, reportedly. Another 11 delegates talking about the treaty negotiations abstained. And the remaining 124 delegates improperly voted to adopt the treaty. Now, according to James Roguski, the noted treaty and international health regulations watchdog, there's a lot of double talk going on here. And here's an important quote that I just got from him. "Adopted doesn't mean the same thing as ratified. It doesn't mean the same thing as signed, and it doesn't mean the same thing as entered into force. They, the negotiators, failed to reach an agreement on the whole reason that they were negotiating." So in other words, they're putting on their best face, but to a degree, the treaty talks are floundering and hitting a lot of snags, procedural among others. So that's some good news, but it's no time to rest on our laurels, of course, for those of us that rightly fear another pandemic crackdown could happen. Remember Exercise Pegasus coming up very soon, a dress rehearsal for another pandemic in the UK. And lastly, we have the upcoming meetings of the Intergovernmental Working Group, and this replaced the intergovernmental negotiating body that was working on the treaty. And November 3 through 7, they're having the third meeting. Early December, their fourth. Next February, mid-February, their fifth meeting. Another meeting in March. And finally, the next World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland in mid-May. Very important stuff. And the pathogen access and sharing system is another important thing to keep in mind. We'll talk about more of that in the weeks to come. So back to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for that. And thank you, Patrick, as well. So we got to finish there for today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in a couple of minutes on the live stream. If you're a UK Column member, stick around for UK Column News Extra. If you're not a member, please consider joining, and then you can join us for Extra as well. But otherwise, have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday as usual. See you then. Bye-bye.